dragged before the judge in handcuffs, until the defense secretary arrived. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Rodriguez never imagined his morning jog would end with steel handcuffs cutting into his wrists. The decorated Army intelligence officer had been running the same route through downtown Washington, D.C. for 3 years, but today felt different. The unmarked black sedans appeared from nowhere, boxing him in near the Lincoln Memorial. "Marcus Rodriguez, you're under arrest for espionage and treason against the United States," announced Agent Sarah Chen from the FBI's Counterintelligence Division. Her voice was cold, professional, carrying the weight of a 2-year investigation that had finally reached its conclusion. Rodriguez stood frozen, sweat from his run mixing with the cold morning air. Tourists nearby stopped to stare as federal agents swarmed around the uniformed officer. His mind raced through recent events, searching for any explanation. The classified documents he'd been reviewing, the late-night meetings with foreign diplomats, the encrypted communications, everything suddenly took on a sinister appearance. There must be some mistake, Rodriguez protested as the handcuffs clicked into place. His voice cracked with disbelief. 20 years of faithful service to his country, deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, commendations for valor. None of it seemed to matter now. Agent Chen read him his rights while cameras from curious onlookers captured every moment. The images would soon flood social media, showing a disheveled Army officer being led away in handcuffs. The headline would write itself, "High-ranking military officer arrested for treason." The drive to FBI headquarters passed in silence. Rodriguez stared out the window at the city he'd sworn to protect, wondering how his life had unraveled so quickly. His wife Elena would be getting ready for work, their twin daughters preparing for school. None of them knew that their world was about to collapse. Inside the federal building, Rodriguez was processed like any other suspect. Fingerprints, photographs, personal belongings confiscated. The American flag pin he always wore was removed and placed in a plastic bag marked as evidence. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. "Your arraignment is scheduled for tomorrow morning," Agent Chen informed him. "Judge Patricia Hawthorne will be presiding. She's known for being tough on national security cases." As Rodriguez was led to his holding cell, he caught a glimpse of the news coverage already beginning. CNN was running breaking news alerts, and his military photo appeared alongside words he never thought would be associated with his name. Alleged traitor. The cell was small, sterile, a far cry from the comfortable officer's quarters he was accustomed to. Rodriguez sat on the narrow bunk and tried to piece together how the investigation had led to him. He thought about the classified intelligence reports he'd handled, the routine meetings with allied foreign officers, the standard diplomatic protocols he'd followed. Hours passed slowly. A public defender named James Mitchell arrived in the evening, looking overwhelmed and underprepared. Mitchell shuffled through a thin file, occasionally glancing up at Rodriguez with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "The evidence against you appears substantial," Mitchell said, adjusting his glasses. "They have records of unauthorized communications, suspicious financial transactions, and witness testimony suggesting you passed classified information to foreign agents." Rodriguez felt the walls closing in. Each accusation seemed plausible when viewed through the lens of suspicion, even though his actions had been legitimate parts of his official duties. The prosecution would paint a picture of betrayal where he saw only service. "I need you to understand something," Rodriguez said, leaning forward. "Every communication, every meeting, every document was part of my authorized intelligence work. Someone has either made a terrible mistake or deliberately set me up." Mitchell nodded, but his expression remained skeptical. He'd heard similar protests from countless clients over the years. The evidence rarely lied, and federal prosecutors didn't bring espionage cases lightly. Outside the detention center, Rodriguez's wife Elena sat in her car, crying. She'd been contacted by military officials and informed of her husband's arrest. The reporters were already gathering outside their house, waiting for a statement she wasn't prepared to give. Their daughters, Sarah and Maria, both 16, were being kept home from school. The family's entire existence had been upended in a matter of hours. Elena couldn't understand how the man she'd been married to for 18 years, the father of her children, could be accused of such heinous crimes. The night passed restlessly for everyone involved. Rodriguez lay awake thinking about his military oath, the sacred trust placed in him by his country. Agent Chen reviewed the case file one final time. Confident in the evidence but troubled by small inconsistencies she couldn't explain, Judge Hawthorne prepared for what would undoubtedly be a high-profile arraignment. The media attention was already intense, and she knew every word spoken in her courtroom would be scrutinized by the public and legal experts alike. As dawn approached, Rodriguez faced the reality that his life as he knew it was over. Whether guilty or innocent, the accusations alone would destroy his career, his reputation, and possibly his family. The upcoming court appearance would be just the beginning of a legal battle that could last years and end with a life sentence in federal prison. The morning news programs were already discussing the case, with former military officials and legal analysts debating the implications. The story had captured national attention, tapping into fears about security breaches and foreign infiltration of the American government. Rodriguez's former colleagues watched the coverage with shock and dismay. Some defended him privately, knowing his character and dedication. Others wondered if they'd missed signs of treachery, questioning their own judgment about a man they'd trusted with their nation's secrets. The morning sun cast long shadows across the steps of the federal courthouse as news vans lined the street. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Rodriguez sat in the transport vehicle, watching reporters adjust their cameras and practice their opening lines. In a few minutes, he would be escorted through that media circus to face formal charges that could end his life as he knew it. Judge Patricia Hawthorne had already reviewed the case file twice. At 62, she'd presided over numerous high-profile national security cases, earning a reputation for fairness tempered with steel. The evidence presented by federal prosecutors seemed overwhelming. Financial records, communication intercepts, and witness testimony painting Rodriguez as a calculated traitor. Inside the courthouse, Assistant U.S. Attorney David Morrison arranged his documents with practiced precision. This case would define his career, he knew. Successfully prosecuting a military officer for espionage would cement his reputation as one of the Justice Department's top national security prosecutors. He'd spent weeks preparing his opening arguments, anticipating every possible defense strategy. Rodriguez's wife Elena entered through a side entrance, hoping to avoid the cameras. She clutched her purse tightly, containing the few family photos she'd been allowed to bring. Her daughters had begged to come, but she'd insisted they stay with their grandmother. Some things were too painful for children to witness. The courtroom filled quickly with spectators, journalists, and curious legal observers. Former military colleagues who'd known Rodriguez for years sat quietly, wrestling with conflicting emotions. How could someone they'd trusted with classified information, someone who'd saved American lives overseas, be capable of such betrayal? Public Defender James Mitchell shuffled nervously through his notes one final time. He'd worked through the night trying to construct a defense, but the evidence seemed insurmountable. His client maintained innocence, but Mitchell had learned to temper his expectations in federal espionage cases. At exactly 9 o'clock, the bailiff called the court to order. Judge Hawthorne entered with her characteristic purposeful stride, her black robes billowing behind her. The courtroom fell silent as she settled into her chair and surveyed the packed gallery. "The United States versus Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Rodriguez," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. "The defendant is charged with conspiracy to commit espionage, violation of the Espionage Act, and treason against the United States." Rodriguez stood as the charges were read, each word hitting him like a physical blow. Conspiracy, espionage, treason. These weren't just legal terms. They represented the complete destruction of everything he'd worked for, everything he believed about himself. The prosecution's evidence was presented methodically, bank records showing unexplained deposits totaling $50,000 over 6 months, encrypted communications with known foreign intelligence operatives, photographs of Rodriguez meeting with suspicious individuals in various locations around Washington, D.C. "Your Honor," Morrison addressed the court, "the defendant exploited his position of trust to systematically betray American intelligence assets overseas. 3 of our foreign operatives have been compromised, and 1 is presumed dead as a direct result of information the defendant provided to hostile foreign powers." Elena gasped audibly from the gallery. The idea that her husband could be responsible for someone's death was beyond her comprehension. She'd watched him struggle with nightmares from his combat deployments, seen how deeply he cared about protecting innocent lives. Mitchell stood to respond, but his arguments seemed weak against the mountain of evidence. Your Honor, my client maintains his innocence. These communications were part of his authorized intelligence duties, and the financial transactions have legitimate explanations that we will present in due course. Judge Hawthorne listened impassively, occasionally making notes. She'd seen many defendants proclaim innocence while facing overwhelming evidence. The legal system would sort out the truth, but first, she needed to address the immediate question of bail. Given the nature of these charges and the defendant's access to classified information, the government requests detention without bail, Morrison argued. The defendant poses both a flight risk and a continued threat to national security. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Rodriguez felt his knees weaken as he realized he might not see his family again for months or possibly years. Elena began crying softly, the sound carrying through the otherwise silent courtroom. Mitchell made a valiant effort to argue for bail. He cited Rodriguez's military service, his family ties, his lack of criminal history. But even as he spoke, he could see the judge's expression growing more skeptical. Federal espionage cases rarely resulted in bail being granted. The court finds that the defendant poses a significant flight risk and potential danger to national security. Judge Hawthorne ruled. Bail is denied. The defendant will remain in federal custody pending trial. The gavel fell with finality, its echo reverberating through Rodriguez's consciousness. This was really happening. He was going to prison, possibly for the rest of his life, for crimes he didn't commit. As the bailiff moved to escort him away, Rodriguez turned toward the gallery to find his wife's face in the crowd. Elena was standing, tears streaming down her cheeks, her hand pressed against her mouth in horror. Their eyes met across the courtroom, and in that moment, both understood that their life together might be ending. The media erupted into activity as Rodriguez was led away in handcuffs. Reporters rushed to file their stories, legal analysts began crafting their commentary, and social media exploded with reactions to the dramatic hearing. Outside the courthouse, Elena faced a wall of cameras and microphones. The questions came rapid fire. Did you know about your husband's alleged activities? How do you feel about the charges? Will you stand by him? She pushed through the crowd without answering, her only thought getting home to her daughters. They would need her now more than ever, as their world continued to crumble around them. Meanwhile, Rodriguez was transported back to the federal detention center, this time with the crushing weight of formal charges and denied bail. His cellmates would soon include him among their ranks permanently, at least until trial. The military career he dedicated his life to was officially over, regardless of the trial's outcome. Agent Chen watched the news coverage from her office, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and unease. The investigation had been thorough, the evidence compelling, but something continued to bother her about certain aspects of the case. Small inconsistencies that didn't quite fit the narrative of a calculating traitor. Judge Hawthorne retired to her chambers, knowing she'd made the right legal decision while privately hoping the justice system would ultimately reveal the truth. High-profile cases like this one carried enormous responsibility, and she felt the weight of it settling on her shoulders. The story dominated news cycles for the remainder of the day, with experts debating everything from military security protocols to the psychology of treason. Rodriguez's name became synonymous with betrayal, his photograph a symbol of the threat posed by insider threats to national security. The federal detention center was a world away from the military bases Rodriguez had called home for 2 decades. His cell was a concrete box measuring 8 feet by 10 feet, shared with a man named Tommy who'd been convicted of tax evasion. The constant noise, the smell of industrial disinfectant, and the complete lack of privacy were daily reminders of how far he'd fallen. Rodriguez spent his days writing letters to his wife and daughters, though Elena's responses had become increasingly brief. The stress of maintaining the household alone, dealing with reporters and facing the judgment of neighbors was taking its toll on his family. His daughters had been forced to change schools after classmates began taunting them about their traitor father. Public Defender James Mitchell visited weekly, each meeting bringing more disappointing news. The government's case seemed airtight with new evidence appearing regularly. Witness testimony from foreign intelligence operatives who claimed Rodriguez had sold them American secrets. Expert analysis of his financial records showing sophisticated money laundering techniques. The prosecution is offering a plea deal, Mitchell announced during one particularly grim meeting. Guilty plea to conspiracy charges, 25 years in federal prison, possibility of parole in 15. They'll drop the treason charge, which carries a potential death sentence. Rodriguez stared at the concrete wall behind Mitchell's head. 25 years would mean missing his daughter's entire adult lives. He'd be nearly 70 when released if he lived that long, but the alternative, facing a treason conviction that could result in execution, seemed even worse. "I won't plead guilty to something I didn't do," Rodriguez said firmly. "If they want to destroy my life, they'll have to prove their case in court." Meanwhile, 3 blocks away in her FBI office, Agent Sarah Chen was experiencing doubts she couldn't shake. The Rodriguez case had been her obsession for 2 years, but reviewing the evidence for the 100th time revealed troubling inconsistencies. The financial deposits that seemed so damning were actually quite sloppy for someone supposedly trained in intelligence tradecraft. Chen pulled out a map and marked every location where Rodriguez had allegedly met with foreign operatives. The pattern was random, lacking the careful planning she'd expect from a professional spy. More troubling, several of the meetings had occurred during times when Rodriguez was provably elsewhere, in briefings, at family events, or on official travel. She decided to re-interview Maria Volkov, a Russian national who claimed Rodriguez had sold her classified information about American assets in Eastern Europe. The woman's story had been consistent through multiple interviews, but something about her demeanor had always bothered Chen. The meeting took place in a secure interview room at FBI headquarters. Volkov, an attractive woman in her mid-30s, maintained her composure as Chen pressed her for details about her alleged relationship with Rodriguez. But when Chen mentioned specific dates and locations, subtle cracks began to appear in her story. "You stated that Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez met you at the Watergate Hotel on March 15th, Chen said, consulting her notes. "But hotel records show no reservation under his name, and security cameras show he never entered the building." Volkov's eyes flickered momentarily before she recovered. "Perhaps I was mistaken about the specific date. The meetings blur together in my memory." Chen leaned forward. "Maria, is there something you're not telling me about this case? Something someone might have asked you to say?" For a moment, Volkov seemed ready to speak. Her hands trembled slightly and her breathing quickened. But then her expression hardened again and she shook her head. Back at the detention center, Rodriguez had found an unlikely ally in his cellmate Tommy. Despite his criminal conviction, Tommy possessed a sharp legal mind and had spent years studying case law. He'd been following Rodriguez's situation with interest, and his observations were troubling. "Something's not right about your case," Tommy said one evening as they lay on their narrow bunks. "I've seen a lot of federal prosecutions, and they usually have one smoking gun, a recording, a document, something undeniable. Your case has lots of circumstantial evidence that looks bad, but no single piece that proves guilt beyond doubt." Rodriguez had been thinking the same thing. The government's case was like a jigsaw puzzle with several pieces missing. Individual elements seemed incriminating, but they didn't form a complete picture of actual espionage activity. "Someone wanted you gone," Tommy continued. "Question is, who benefits from destroying your career and reputation?" That night, Rodriguez lay awake thinking about his enemies. In 20 years of military service, he'd made difficult decisions that hadn't pleased everyone. He'd reported security violations, recommended against certain promotions, and opposed operations he considered unethical. Any number of people might harbor grudges against him. Elena's visits had become less frequent, and when she did come, the conversations were strained. The financial burden of legal fees and supporting the family alone was crushing her. Rodriguez could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her shoulders sagged under the weight of their circumstances. "The girls are asking when you're coming home," Elena said during one particularly difficult visit. "I don't know what to tell them anymore. Sarah's grades are suffering and Maria has started getting into fights at school." Rodriguez pressed his hand against the bulletproof glass separating them, wishing he could hold his wife and daughters. The charges against him weren't just destroying his life, they were tearing apart his entire family. Meanwhile, Agent Chen's investigation had taken an unexpected turn. Cross-referencing Rodriguez's alleged activities with other ongoing investigations revealed curious patterns. Several of the foreign operatives who claimed to have received information from Rodriguez were also connected to a separate counterintelligence operation. targeting Russian infiltration of American intelligence agencies. Chen requested access to classified files related to this other operation and discovered something that made her blood run cold. The same Russian handlers who were supposedly paying Rodriguez for information were actually double agents working for American intelligence. If Rodriguez had been passing information to them, he might have been unknowingly participating in an authorized disinformation campaign. The implications were staggering. Rodriguez might not be a traitor at all. He might be an innocent man caught in the crossfire of a complex counterintelligence operation. But proving it would require accessing classified information that could compromise ongoing operations and endanger American agents overseas. Chen sat in her car outside FBI headquarters, staring at the Rodriguez case file. Everything she'd believed about the investigation was potentially wrong. A decorated Army officer might be rotting in prison for crimes he didn't commit, while real traitors remained free to continue their activities. She thought about her own career, the promotions that would surely come if the Rodriguez conviction held. But she also thought about justice, and about a man's family being destroyed by false accusations. The decision she made in the next few days would determine not only Rodriguez's fate, but also the integrity of the entire investigation. Rodriguez's public defender Mitchell was also beginning to have doubts. Late nights spent reviewing evidence had revealed small inconsistencies that individually seemed insignificant, but collectively suggested something was wrong. Financial records that didn't quite match the prosecution's timeline, communications that had been selectively edited to remove context. The case that had seemed hopeless was beginning to show cracks, but exploiting those cracks would require resources and expertise that Mitchell's overloaded public defender's office simply didn't possess. Rodriguez needed a different kind of legal representation, the kind that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars his family didn't have. Agent Sarah Chen couldn't sleep. For 3 weeks, she'd been secretly reinvestigating the Rodriguez case, following leads that her superiors had dismissed as irrelevant. What she'd discovered kept her awake at night, staring at the ceiling of her Georgetown apartment, wrestling with the implications of what appeared to be a massive miscarriage of justice. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Chen had been reviewing financial records for the 5th time when she noticed something odd about the bank account where Rodriguez had allegedly received payments. The account had been opened 3 months before Rodriguez's first supposed contact with foreign agents, but the opening documents contained a signature that didn't quite match Rodriguez's other financial paperwork. Chen enlisted the help of FBI handwriting expert Dr. Patricia Walsh, asking her to analyze the signatures without revealing which case they were connected to. Walsh's report was damning. The signatures were sophisticated forgeries, created by someone with access to multiple examples of Rodriguez's authentic signature. Whoever did this was a professional, Walsh explained during a private meeting in Chen's office. They had extensive samples to work from and considerable skill in document forgery. This isn't the work of an amateur. The implications were staggering. If Rodriguez hadn't opened the account himself, then someone else had created it to frame him. But who had the resources and motivation to orchestrate such an elaborate deception? Chen's investigation led her deeper into the classified world of counterintelligence operations. Using her security clearance, she accessed files related to Operation Nightfall, a multi-year effort to identify Russian moles within American intelligence agencies. What she found made her hands shake as she read. Rodriguez's name appeared in several classified memos not as a suspect, but as an investigator. He'd been secretly tasked with identifying security leaks in his unit, working directly with counterintelligence specialists. His meetings with foreign nationals weren't treasonous activities. They were authorized operations designed to feed disinformation to enemy agents. Someone had weaponized Rodriguez's legitimate counterintelligence work against him, twisting authorized activities into apparent evidence of treason. But the classified nature of his real assignment meant he couldn't defend himself without compromising ongoing operations and potentially endangering American agents overseas. Chen realized she was looking at a conspiracy that went far beyond simple espionage. Someone within the American intelligence community had deliberately framed Rodriguez, possibly to protect the real mole that Operation Nightfall was trying to identify. The stakes couldn't be higher. National security, innocent lives, and the integrity of the entire intelligence apparatus. Meanwhile, at the detention center, Rodriguez was experiencing his own revelation. His cellmate Tommy had been released the previous week, but not before sharing a crucial piece of information. Tommy had overheard a conversation between two other inmates about Rodriguez's case, and what he'd learned was shocking. One of them said his lawyer heard something about your case Tommy had whispered on his last night. Something about a setup, about powerful people wanting you gone. He didn't know details, but he said there are folks in Washington who profit when good soldiers get destroyed. Rodriguez had initially dismissed this as prison gossip, but the seed of doubt had been planted. He began thinking systematically about his career, about the operations he'd been involved in, the secrets he'd kept. His work with Operation Nightfall had put him in contact with highly classified information about suspected moles within the intelligence community. The pieces began falling into place with terrifying clarity. Rodriguez realized he hadn't been arrested because he was a traitor. He'd been framed because his investigation was getting too close to the truth about real traitors, embedded within American intelligence. During Elena's next visit, Rodriguez tried to explain his theory without revealing classified information that could make both their situations worse. Elena, I need you to understand something. I can't tell you everything, but the charges against me aren't what they seem. Someone wanted me silenced, and this was the most effective way to do it. Elena stared at her husband through the bulletproof glass, seeing something in his eyes that hadn't been there in months. Hope. For the first time since his arrest, Rodriguez seemed confident rather than defeated. What are you saying, Marcus? I'm saying that someone very powerful wanted me out of the way, and they were willing to destroy our family to make that happen. But the truth has a way of surfacing, especially when good people refuse to let injustice stand. Agent Chen's private investigation had reached a critical juncture. She'd identified 3 senior intelligence officials who had access to the information needed to frame Rodriguez, but she lacked evidence to prove which one was responsible. Moreover, her unauthorized investigation had not gone unnoticed. FBI Deputy Director Robert Harrison summoned Chen to his office on a Friday afternoon. Harrison was a career bureaucrat known for protecting the Bureau's reputation above all other concerns. His expression was stern as Chen entered his corner office overlooking the Potomac. Agent Chen, I understand you've been conducting unauthorized inquiries into the Rodriguez case. That case is closed, and your continued interference is becoming problematic. Chen had anticipated this moment and prepared her response carefully. Sir, I've discovered evidence that suggests Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez may have been framed. The integrity of our investigation is at stake. Harrison's face darkened. The Rodriguez case was thoroughly investigated by our best agents and prosecutors. The evidence is overwhelming. Your job is to execute FBI policy, not second-guess decisions made above your pay grade. But sir, the signature analysis clearly shows— Agent Chen, Harrison interrupted, you're walking a dangerous line. Continue this unauthorized investigation, and you'll find yourself facing disciplinary action that could end your career. The Rodriguez case is closed. Chen left Harrison's office understanding that powerful forces were aligned against the truth. Her investigation had confirmed Rodriguez's innocence, but proving it would require evidence that her superiors were determined to suppress. That evening, Chen sat in her car outside the federal detention center, watching the lights in the cell windows. Somewhere inside, an innocent man was serving time for crimes he didn't commit, while the real traitors remained free to continue compromising American security. She thought about her father, a police officer who had taught her that justice mattered more than career advancement. Sometimes doing the right thing costs everything, he'd told her when she joined the FBI. But living with yourself afterward is worth the price. Chen made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't prove Rodriguez's innocence through official channels, but she knew someone who might have the power and motivation to expose the truth. Defense Secretary James Mattingly had a reputation for protecting soldiers under his command. Regardless of political consequences, getting information to Mattingly without compromising her own security would be challenging, but Chen had an idea. Mattingly was scheduled to testify before a Senate committee the following week. If Chen could get the right documents to someone on that committee, the truth about Rodriguez might finally surface. Rodriguez's public defender Mitchell was also experiencing a change of heart. The evidence inconsistencies that had troubled him were becoming impossible to ignore. During his latest meeting with Rodriguez, Mitchell shared his growing concerns. "Marcus, I'm going to be honest with you. When I first took this case, I assumed you were guilty and focused on damage control. But the more I investigate, the more convinced I become that someone has orchestrated a very sophisticated frame job." Rodriguez felt a surge of hope mixed with anger. If his own lawyer was finally seeing the truth, maybe there was still a chance for justice. "The problem," Mitchell continued, "is that proving your innocence will require resources I don't have access to. We need expert witnesses, investigative support, and someone with enough influence to challenge the intelligence community's narrative." "What are you suggesting?" Mitchell hesitated before answering. "I'm suggesting that your case is bigger than both of us. This isn't just about one wrongfully accused soldier. It's about corruption at the highest levels of government. We need help from someone with the power to take on that kind of fight." Defense Secretary James Mattingly was reviewing briefing documents in his Pentagon office when his aide knocked urgently on the door. Colonel Patricia Hayes entered carrying a manila envelope that had been hand-delivered by someone claiming to represent a concerned federal agent. "Sir, you need to see this immediately. It concerns Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez." Mattingly had been following the Rodriguez case with interest and growing concern. A 20-year veteran with an exemplary record suddenly arrested for espionage had struck him as suspicious from the beginning. Military officers didn't typically become traitors overnight, especially those with Rodriguez's background and family situation. The envelope contained copies of classified documents, signature analyses, and a detailed timeline that painted a picture completely different from what had been presented in court. As Mattingly read, his expression grew increasingly grim. If these documents were authentic, then the Department of Defense had allowed one of its own officers to be framed for crimes he didn't commit. "Get me a secure line to FBI Director Morrison," Mattingly ordered. "And I want our best counterintelligence people in my office within the hour. Someone is going to explain to me how this happened." The call to FBI Director Morrison was tense and formal. Mattingly had served in combat alongside Morrison years earlier, but their friendship couldn't survive what appeared to be a massive intelligence failure that had destroyed an innocent family. "Bob, I'm holding documents that suggest Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez was framed. I need to know what the Bureau is doing about this, and I need to know now." Morrison's response was carefully measured. "Jim, the Rodriguez case was thoroughly investigated. The evidence was overwhelming, and the prosecution was handled by our best people. Then explain to me why Rodriguez was conducting authorized counterintelligence operations at the same time he was supposedly committing treason. Explain how someone forged his signature to open bank accounts he never knew existed." The silence on the other end of the line lasted several seconds. Morrison was clearly unprepared for Mattingly's level of detailed knowledge about the case. "Jim, this is a complex situation involving ongoing operations I can't discuss over the phone. Perhaps we should meet in person to discuss the details." "We'll meet, Bob, but not just you and me. I want everyone involved in this investigation in the room. And I want answers that don't compromise the life of an innocent soldier." Meanwhile, Agent Sarah Chen was watching news coverage of Mattingly's emergency meeting with congressional leaders. She'd taken an enormous risk in providing classified documents to someone outside her chain of command. But seeing the defense secretary's reaction confirmed she'd made the right choice. Chen's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Your sacrifice won't be forgotten. Truth is coming." She suspected the message came from someone connected to Rodriguez's defense team, but she couldn't be certain without compromising operational security. At the detention center, Rodriguez noticed increased activity among the guards and administrative staff. Unusual meetings were taking place, and several officials he'd never seen before were touring the facility. His cellmate replacement, a former corporate executive named David, confirmed that something big was happening. "Word is that some very important people are asking questions about your case," David said quietly during their evening meal. "Guards are talking about federal investigations, congressional oversight, real high-level stuff." Rodriguez felt a surge of hope mixed with caution. He'd experienced enough disappointments over the past months to temper his expectations, but the possibility that someone with real power was finally paying attention to his situation was electrifying. Elena received a call from Mitchell with news that would change everything. "Elena, we've received word that Defense Secretary Mattingly is personally intervening in Marcus's case. He's demanding a complete review of the evidence, and he's bringing resources that our public defender's office could never access." Elena broke down crying, this time from relief rather than despair. For months, she'd watched her husband's situation grow increasingly hopeless while their family fell apart. The possibility that someone with real power was willing to fight for Marcus gave her the first genuine hope she'd felt since his arrest. "What does this mean for the trial?" Elena asked. "It means we might actually have a chance," Mitchell replied. "Mattingly has the authority to declassify documents that could prove Marcus's innocence, and he's not afraid to challenge the intelligence community when soldiers' lives are at stake." The congressional hearing that would ultimately transform Rodriguez's case took place on a rainy Tuesday morning in Washington. Defense Secretary Mattingly sat at the witness table, flanked by military lawyers and intelligence officials, facing a bipartisan panel of senators who had been briefed on the classified aspects of the Rodriguez situation. Senator Catherine Walsh, the committee chairwoman, opened the hearing with words that would later be quoted in history books. "We're here today to examine what appears to be a catastrophic failure of our intelligence and justice systems, resulting in the false imprisonment of a decorated American soldier." Mattingly's testimony was methodical and devastating. He presented evidence showing that Rodriguez had been conducting authorized counterintelligence operations, that his communications with foreign nationals were part of official duties, and that someone had deliberately manipulated evidence to frame him for treason. "Senators, we have a loyal American soldier sitting in federal prison for crimes he not only didn't commit, but crimes that directly contradict the secret mission he was carrying out on behalf of his country. This isn't just an injustice, it's a national security disaster." The hearing was conducted largely in closed session due to classified information, but news of Mattingly's explosive testimony leaked quickly. Cable news networks began wall-to-wall coverage of what commentators called the biggest intelligence scandal in decades. Rodriguez watched the coverage from the detention center's common area, surrounded by fellow inmates who had followed his case with interest. Seeing Defense Secretary Mattingly publicly defending his innocence felt surreal after months of being treated as a traitor and pariah. "Looks like you might actually get out of this place," David observed. "That's the Secretary of Defense going to bat for you on national television." Agent Chen watched the hearing coverage from her FBI office, knowing that her career was likely over, but feeling satisfaction that the truth was finally emerging. She'd received informal word that she was being transferred to a field office in rural Montana, effectively exile for a counterintelligence specialist, but seeing Rodriguez's vindication made the professional sacrifice worthwhile. The pressure from Mattingly's intervention and congressional oversight finally broke the conspiracy that had framed Rodriguez. Within 48 hours of the hearing, Maria Volkov requested a meeting with federal prosecutors. In exchange for witness protection and a reduced sentence on unrelated charges, she agreed to reveal the truth about her role in the Rodriguez frame job. Volkov's confession was recorded in a secure FBI facility, with Defense Department representatives present, to ensure military interests were protected. Her story revealed a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of American intelligence. "I was recruited by Deputy Director Robert Harrison 18 months ago," Volkov began, her voice barely above a whisper. "He told me that Rodriguez was investigating Operation Nightfall and getting too close to identifying a high-level Russian asset within American intelligence. Harrison said Rodriguez had to be neutralized before he exposed ongoing operations." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Harrison, the FBI deputy director who had tried to shut down Chen's investigation, was allegedly the mole that Rodriguez had been tasked with finding. The entire espionage case had been designed to protect a traitor by destroying the investigator, who threatened to expose him. Volkov continued her devastating testimony, describing how Harrison had provided her with Rodriguez's personal information, copies of his signatures, and detailed knowledge of his authorized counterintelligence activities. The evidence that had seemed so damning in court had been carefully manufactured to frame an innocent man. Harrison promised me American citizenship and protection if I testified against Rodriguez. He said Rodriguez was a threat to Russian-American relations and needed to be stopped. I didn't realize I was helping to frame an innocent man until it was too late. Federal prosecutors immediately placed Harrison under surveillance while they verified Volkov's claims. The investigation moved with unprecedented speed, driven by pressure from Defense Secretary Mattingly and congressional oversight committees who demanded immediate action. Meanwhile, Rodriguez's legal situation began changing rapidly. Mitchell received a call from the U.S. Attorney's Office requesting an emergency meeting to discuss significant developments in his client's case. The tone was apologetic rather than adversarial, suggesting that prosecutors were preparing to acknowledge their mistake. Elena received word that she should prepare for possible developments in Marcus's case, though officials couldn't provide specific details due to ongoing security concerns. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope that her husband might actually come home. The media coverage intensified as leaked details of Volkov's confession reached journalists. Headlines screamed about intelligence community corruption, frame jobs, and the persecution of innocent soldiers. Rodriguez's mugshot, which had symbolized treason for months, now represented the face of injustice and government overreach. Rodriguez himself remained cautiously optimistic as he watched developments unfold. Years of military service had taught him that situations could change rapidly, often in unexpected ways. He'd learned not to count on anything until it was official, but the momentum seemed to be building toward his vindication. Harrison, meanwhile, was arrested quietly at his Georgetown home on a Sunday morning. FBI agents who had once worked under his leadership served the warrant, creating an unprecedented situation within the Bureau's hierarchy. The man who had orchestrated Rodriguez's destruction was finally facing justice himself. The arrest triggered a comprehensive review of every case Harrison had overseen, creating chaos within the FBI's counterintelligence division. Dozens of investigations had to be re-examined, foreign operations reassessed, and agent safety protocols updated to account for the damage caused by a high-level mole. As the truth emerged, Rodriguez's case became a symbol of both government overreach and the importance of individuals willing to risk everything for justice. Agent Chen's sacrifice, Mattingly's intervention, and even Volkov's eventual cooperation had combined to expose a conspiracy that might otherwise have destroyed an innocent family and compromised national security indefinitely. The same courtroom that had witnessed Rodriguez's humiliation 6 months earlier now prepared for his vindication. Judge Patricia Hawthorne entered with the same purposeful stride, but this time her expression carried the weight of correcting a grave injustice. The media gallery was packed again, but the story they would report would be dramatically different. Rodriguez sat at the defense table wearing a clean military uniform that Elena had brought from home. The transformation was remarkable. Gone was the defeated man who had been led away in handcuffs. In his place sat a soldier whose honor was about to be restored, whose family was about to be made whole again. The United States versus Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Rodriguez, Judge Hawthorne announced. The government has filed a motion to dismiss all charges against the defendant based on newly discovered evidence of prosecutorial misconduct and government malfeasance. Assistant U.S. Attorney David Morrison stood to address the court, but his confident demeanor from months earlier had been replaced by visible discomfort. The case that was supposed to define his career had instead become the greatest embarrassment of his professional life. Your Honor, the government moves to dismiss all charges against Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez with prejudice. Our investigation has revealed that the defendant was the victim of an elaborate conspiracy designed to frame him for crimes he did not commit. Rodriguez felt Elena's hand squeeze his shoulder from the gallery behind him. Their daughters Sarah and Maria sat beside their mother, finally able to witness their father's vindication after months of shame and isolation. The twins had grown up significantly during their father's imprisonment, forced to mature beyond their years while dealing with public humiliation and family crisis. Judge Hawthorne reviewed the dismissal documents with careful attention to detail. The legal implications were staggering. Not only was Rodriguez innocent, but the evidence suggested he had been actively working to protect American security when he was framed by the very people he was investigating. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez. Please stand, Judge Hawthorne ordered. Rodriguez rose, his military bearing evident despite months of confinement. Sir, on behalf of the United States justice system, I offer you our sincerest apologies for the grave injustice you have suffered. The charges against you are dismissed with prejudice, meaning they cannot be refiled. You are free to go. The gavel fell, but this time its sound represented liberation rather than condemnation. Rodriguez felt his knees buckle slightly as the reality hit him. He was actually going home. The nightmare that had consumed his family for 6 months was finally over. Elena rushed from the gallery, tears streaming down her face as she embraced her husband for the first time, without bulletproof glass between them. Sarah and Maria joined the reunion, and for several minutes the Rodriguez family stood together in the courtroom, holding each other and crying with relief. Defense Secretary Mattingly had traveled to the courthouse personally to witness Rodriguez's exoneration. As the family embraced, he approached with a mixture of pride and regret evident in his expression. "Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez, I want you to know that your service to this country has never been in question. What happened to you was an abomination, and we will do everything in our power to make this right." Rodriguez saluted his superior officer, a gesture that felt meaningful after months of being treated as a criminal. "Sir, I'm grateful for your intervention. Without your willingness to challenge the system, my family and I would have been destroyed." The media frenzy outside the courthouse was intense, but different from Rodriguez's arrest. This time, reporters wanted to hear from the vindicated soldier rather than the accused traitor. Rodriguez's first statement as a free man was brief but powerful. 6 months ago, I was arrested for crimes I didn't commit by people who knew I was innocent. Today, justice has been served, but the real heroes are the individuals who risk their careers to expose the truth. Agent Sarah Chen, Defense Secretary Mattingly, and others who cannot be named put justice ahead of personal interests. Elena stood beside her husband, finally able to speak publicly without fear. "Our family has been through hell, but we never lost faith that the truth would eventually surface. Marcus is not just innocent, he's a hero who was punished for trying to protect his country." The drive home was surreal for Rodriguez. Streets he had jogged 6 months earlier as a free man now seemed different, more precious. Simple pleasures like choosing what to eat for dinner or sleeping in his own bed felt like extraordinary luxuries. Sarah and Maria had prepared a welcome home banner that stretched across their living room. The house had been maintained by Elena despite enormous financial pressures, but Rodriguez could see the strain in worn furniture and unpaid bills stacked on the kitchen counter. "Dad, we never stopped believing you were innocent," Sarah said as they sat around the dinner table that evening. "Even when kids at school called you a traitor, we knew they were wrong." Maria nodded agreement. "Mom made sure we understood that sometimes good people get blamed for things they didn't do, but that doesn't make them bad people." Rodriguez felt overwhelming pride in his family's strength and loyalty. They had endured public humiliation, financial hardship, and social ostracism without ever wavering in their support for him. The following weeks brought a flood of support and apologies. Former colleagues who had distanced themselves during his imprisonment reached out to express regret and offer assistance. Media outlets that had reported his guilt with certainty now featured his story as an example of government overreach and the importance of due process. Agent Sarah Chen received a personal call from Rodriguez thanking her for her courage in pursuing the truth, despite professional risks. Her transfer to Montana had been quietly canceled, and she was being considered for promotion within the FBI's reformed counterintelligence division. "Agent Chen, I want you to know that your willingness to risk everything for justice saved my family," Rodriguez told her. "There aren't words adequate to express my gratitude." Chen's voice was emotional as she responded. "Lieutenant Colonel, knowing that an innocent man is free and back with his family makes everything worthwhile. This is why I became an FBI agent, to serve justice, not to protect institutional interests." The criminal case against Deputy Director Harrison proceeded swiftly. Faced with overwhelming evidence of his treasonous activities, he negotiated a plea agreement that would send him to federal prison for the rest of his life. His cooperation revealed additional Russian assets within American intelligence, leading to the largest counterintelligence success in decades. Rodriguez's military career was not only restored, but enhanced. A formal ceremony at the Pentagon recognized his service and sacrifice, with Defense Secretary Mattingly personally apologizing on behalf of the entire Department of Defense. Rodriguez was promoted to full colonel and offered his choice of assignments. The financial compensation for his wrongful imprisonment was substantial, allowing the Rodriguez family to recover from the economic devastation they had endured. But more important than money was the restoration of Rodriguez's reputation and his family's sense of security. Rodriguez chose to remain in military service, accepting a position in counterintelligence training where he could help prepare future soldiers to avoid the pitfalls that had nearly destroyed his life. His experience as both investigator and victim gave him unique insights into the complexities of intelligence work. Elena returned to her career with renewed purpose, having discovered inner strength she didn't know she possessed. The ordeal had tested their marriage but ultimately strengthened their bond. Sarah and Maria, now seniors in high school, had learned valuable lessons about resilience, justice, and the importance of standing by family during difficult times. Judge Patricia Hawthorne often reflected on the Rodriguez case as a reminder of the justice system's fallibility and the importance of remaining open to new evidence even when cases seem certain. She implemented new protocols in her courtroom designed to prevent similar miscarriages of justice. The Rodriguez case became a turning point in American counterintelligence, leading to enhanced oversight procedures, improved agent training, and better protection for whistleblowers who expose corruption within intelligence agencies. Rodriguez's vindication demonstrated that even the most powerful institutions could be held accountable when dedicated individuals refused to allow injustice to stand. Years later, Rodriguez would look back on his ordeal as the most difficult but ultimately most meaningful experience of his life. It had cost his family dearly, but it had also revealed the power of truth and the importance of individuals willing to sacrifice everything for justice. His name, once synonymous with treason, became a symbol of resilience and the American principle that justice, though sometimes delayed, will ultimately prevail.